To the final part of the evening, and I want to introduce our guest speaker. We are deeply honoured to have Justine McCarthy with us this evening. Justine McCarthy is a writer, broadcaster and a journalist with the Sunday Times. She is one of Ireland's most respected commentators on politics and culture, and she is Adjunct Professor of Journalism at the University of Limerick. She is the author of Mary McAleese, The Outsider, and of Deep Deception, Ireland's Swimming Scandals, which was aptly described by Fintan O'Toole as the best of the large crop of books by journalists that year. It grows beyond its immediate subject to become a terrifying anatomy of the capacity for denial and vilification within any enclosed world. Justine is, of course, most importantly, also a woman of the South, as she hails from Bandon, County Cork. So I invite you all to welcome Justine here this evening.
Good evening. My new friend here, Maurice, was telling me earlier that the last speaker you had here was very witty. I just want to warn you, if you've come expecting sparkling wit, now is the time to leave. There's serious business to discuss. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, and also quite scary. Coming home and being amongst your own is quite a terrifying experience. As Linda mentioned, I'm from Bandon, and this morning my husband and I had a drive down to Bandon, and as we were leaving, Dennis remarked on what a lovely town it is. And I was thinking, yes, it is. And then I remembered that my cousin Johnny McCarthy, who's sitting over there, sent me an email last week, and attached to it was a copy of the official order issued by the then occupying authorities, expelling his maternal grand-aunts from Cork for their common among illicit activities and banishing them to Bandon. So what is one woman's proud boast was other women's cruel and unusual punishment. So we're gathered here 100 years after Ireland led the world with its fight for a republic of equals. And we do so against what I think is rather disturbing mood music. We've recently had the Taoiseach, Joan Burton, talking about the sexism she encounters in politics. And we've had the outgoing Senator, Gillian Van Turnout, telling us how she was literally pinned against a wall in Leinster House by fellow politicians who were trying to persuade her of whatever argument to be on their side. We do so as we have 8 politicians negotiating to form the next government, and only one of them is a woman. We do so as 15 independent TDs last week, or the week before, I can't remember, the weeks are all blending into one, organised a meeting in Leinster House to agree on their position. And only when the meeting was over did they realise that they had forgotten to invite 2 of the independent TDs. Those 2 happened to be the only 2 women, Maureen O'Sullivan and Catherine Sapone. So what would the 1916 revolutionaries have thought of this? I imagine they would have thought that the cause is not quite won yet. There's been a lot of talk this year about rewriting history and putting women back in their rightful place into history, and that has been very welcome. But I find that a lot of it has been very tokenistic, and we can see that from the women here. I mean, we have not heard some of these mentioned at all this year. I don't want to be a critic of RTE because I think it's done very good work. I think the debate on the GPO was excellent. I thought the concert during Easter weekend was really uplifting and moving. but its drama output. We were told that Rebellion was going to be the flagship that was going to be told, it was going to tell the story of the Rising through 3 different women. And what did we get? We got 2 women sitting in a mansion out in Dalkey waiting for the man of their dreams to come out and choose between them. And a 3rd woman who had something of an army uniform fetish, and the highlight of her activity in the Rising was a lesbian kiss. So the women of Cork and of Munster never shrank from the struggle for freedom. Even after it was won and the fairer sex had been sent packing back to the kitchen by the new state, the rebel county, and I would say the rebel province, lived up to its name. Mary McSweeney was one of only 2 women TDs in the Dáil, in the 3rd Dáil, elected in 1923, the other being Sinn Féin's Professor Kate O'Callaghan. In fact, Kate, whose maiden name was Murphy, was another Cork woman. So the only 2 women TDs were Cork women. Both Mary and Kate were arrested and interned together in Kilmainham jail. Kate's husband, Michael O'Callaghan, was a former mayor of Limerick, and he was murdered during the War of Independence. It's thought by members of the Black and Tans. They came to the O'Callaghan's home in the middle of the night when the couple were in bed. They shot Michael dead, and they left Kate at the bottom of the stairs, shot in the arm. When Jim Kemmy, the late Limerick socialist politician, wrote a biographical note on Michael Murphy, he observed that Kate had provided what he called an intellectual spur to her husband's yearning for Irish self-determination. She had academic qualifications from both the Royal University of Ireland and Cambridge, and served 2 consecutive terms as a TD. Yet, if you check her Wikipedia entry, you'll find it runs to a grand total of precisely 7 sentences. When Kate, in a letter Kate wrote to Eamon de Valera on the 23rd of May 1937, she outlined her objections to his draft constitution. Specifically, she deplored the articles relating to the status of women, calling them a great disappointment, not just to her, but, I quote, to the many who hoped for the equal rights and equal opportunities which the proclamation of the Republic in 1916 guaranteed to all its citizens. She wrote, in the period of the war with England, 1916 to 1923, the Irish nation rose to the test as never before in its history. Men and women serving alike. There was no talk then of the inadequate strength of women, or their differences of capacity, physical and moral, and of social function. And I am surprised that you, who lived through the period in intimate contact with the ordinary people of the nation, and valued, I think, the splendid service of the women of the people, now include in this draft constitution clauses which, however well-intentioned, will militate against women in a state based on their work and sacrifice. Kate lost her seat in the next general election. So did Maura. It would take 54 more years before the number of women in the Dáil would reach double figures, when 11 women were elected in 1981. In that half-century, Kate O'Callaghan's dire warning and prescient words that the sidelining of women by Bunreacht na hÉireann would militate against them proved painfully, scandalously, and in many cases, tragically, all too true. The disproportionate representation of women in the Dáil is commonly regarded as something of an optical problem. The great, stonking, fossilised maleness of Leinster House is a bad look for a country that wants to be seen as modern and progressive. The shallowness of the debate about the lack of women in political life seldom allows for deeper examination of its cause and effect. When Lehman Brothers Bank crashed, causing Western economies to follow suit in 2008, some people wondered what might have happened if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman's sisters. While nobody can say it would have been better, undoubtedly it would have been different. The same can be said about the treatment of women by the Irish state since its foundation. There is no shortage of examples of how the absence of women's voices in the Dáil has had direct and damaging consequences for female citizens and for their families. Think of Noel Brown's doomed mother and child scheme, when just 5 of the country's 145 TDs were women. Think of the barbaric practice of symphysiotomy, when 1,500 women and girls in childbirth had their pelvises split so that they could continue producing lots of babies. Symphysiotomy was outlawed in Paris in 1798, but it went on in Ireland until the 1980s, and there's even a report of it in the early 1990s. Think of the Magdalen laundries, Ireland's asylums of shame, where unmarried and poor girls and women were sent when they got pregnant. Most of them, by the way, seem to have got pregnant by immaculate conception, because there was never a father mentioned. These men vanished as mysteriously as Elizabeth O'Farrell vanished from the photographs of the rebels' surrender in Moore Street in 1916. Think too of the hepatitis C anti-D scandal, when the Irish state threatened Bridget McCole on her deathbed that it would sue her penniless if she pursued her court case for compensation. And think of the many cruel and sometimes macabre cases that have resulted from the constitutional ban on abortion. On the Christmas Eve before last, I sat in the High Court while 3 judges and 5 teams of lawyers pored over the 8th Amendment. Their unenviable task was to determine if Bunreacht na hÉireann required that a brain-dead young mother of 2 children should be kept artificially breathing until her 15-week-old fetus could be born. 7 doctors gave evidence. Some of them cried as they testified. I wondered what country does something like this to its people. And the answer that came to me was a country that silences the voice of half of its citizens. The good news is that Ireland is turning a corner. The gender quota has come into effect. More women are in key roles shaping the nation, though the critical mass is still pathetically short of what it needs to be. Fairness and equality are ideals that have come back into vogue, particularly in the inspiring atmosphere of the Easter commemorations, and I would also say the inspiring speeches of our President, Michael D. Higgins, who is proof that self-determination is important. Many of the heroic women who laid the foundations for our state have been exhumed from the graveyard of history, and that is a great relief. But what we have to guard against is that the restoration of women to their rightful place is not simply tokenistic. It's not good enough to say Ireland now acknowledges that women participated in the revolution too, because there's this sort of begrudging attitude that goes, sure, wasn't Countess Markievicz there even if she was a bit of a posh psycho playing soldiers in Stephen's Green? Dublin has been in the spotlight for the 1916 centenary, but when 2021 comes around, Cork, like its women, will also be restored to its rightful place, what Rebecca calls the international Mecca. My generation is the last generation with a link to those who actually remembered the fight and the struggle for independence. I remember my mother telling us many stories about when she arrived in Bandon from Carrigtwohill after marrying my father and finding bullet marks on the back wall in the yard from where the Black and Tans had shot at my grandmother, her husband having been interned in Ballykinler, and she ran the pub in Bandon while she had 2 children at that stage under the age of 2, and at night would have to put the children in the horse and trap and travel out to Kilbrittain to stay with family to be safe. So there were many women who were heroes whose stories, have never been told in public. And I think all these women deserve to be celebrated and remembered. The women that this exhibition celebrates have left us a powerful and inspiring legacy, and it behoves us, the present generation and the next generations, to carry their torch onwards to ensure that the cause is ultimately achieved. And women are doing that. The women who have organised this exhibition and this wonderful event are doing exactly that. Particularly women like Kay and Rebecca Hart and this magnificent institution, the Farmgate. And the other women who were involved in organising the exhibition, Maureen, Marie, Linda, Sandra, and the honorary women, John, Andy and Kevin. The stories of these women in the South give us, their descendants, real reason to be proud. Long live the Republic. Long live Manona Heron and the women of the South.